Let's move on next to Vodafone, Vodacom. Right, Vodacom. Vodacom is, of course, the South African company, which is majority controlled by Vodafone. That's why I was getting the two a little bit mangled there. Vodafone is one of the world's largest mobile telephony companies based in the United Kingdom, okay? Vodacom is its local operation. It was always a partner right from the beginning, but in recent years, it acquired more and more of the shares in that entity here as it was keen to hoover up and control its Southern African sub-Saharan subsidiary. Vodacom gets to operate inside of sub-Saharan Africa, and that's because Vodafone has a business in East Africa, that's Safaricom, has a business in Egypt, that's Vodacom Egypt, and then has an investment in some businesses in Nigeria, each and of an own accord. So what we're talking about here is the JSE-listed Vodacom, which has a market cap of 194 billion rand, okay? So roughly half of MTN. And that's because it has a smaller addressable market and a smaller total number of subscribers because of where they operate. Where they operate is South Africa, Mozambique, Tanzania, and the DRC. South Africa, a rich country with a well-developed market share here, northwards of 50%, because they were the first mover. Right back in 1984, 85, in those early days, when they were planning this stuff and when they rolled it out in 94, 95, that time, then Vodacom got in earliest and was operational for about 4 or 5 months before MTN got up and running. So they grabbed all of that premium customer base and got their noses in front right at the beginning. In the early days, so the South African telecom company and the South African government were an anchor shareholder, but that stake was reduced in recent times. 194 billion rands worth of market cap. Let's go back to the price to earnings ratio. That's 15.19. So very similar to MTN, which is interesting. Dividend yield also pretty similar, close to 6%. So why would you buy the one as opposed to the other? Because they have a similar earnings base. It should be noted that Mozambique, the DRC, and Tanzania are poor countries and have less potential than Nigeria. Interesting comparison because, of course, Nigeria is still a middle-income country with regard to its GDP per capita, but Nigeria has a larger premium market, whereas a country like Tanzania has a smaller group of people that can really afford these kind of services, and that's true, of course, in addition, or even more so, with regard to countries like Mozambique or the DRC. Here in South Africa, of course, we are talking about a business with great potential. It's furthest along with regard to data sales. So what you'll see here is in the postpaid, in other words, contract subscriber market, more and more people are switching their contracts and using less and less call time, voice, and more data. And that makes sense because in the old days, people used to phone each other up if they needed to talk. What do you do now? You send yourself a WhatsApp message. If your children need a time pickup at school, they're not going to phone you up, for goodness sakes. They're going to send you a message. Or if you're keen to be online and interacting with the outside world, you're going to use your phone because the contract allows you to do that at length because you've allocated more of that spend to data. So if you look at Vodacom's results, you'll see a substantial and rapid growth of data revenues running at about 30-40% per annum year-on-year increases. And of course, the game there is to try and charge as much as they can, but to remain competitive, because people, of course, will shop around for data contracts. In addition to that, we know that people normally have a couple of additional SIMs, which is perhaps in an iPad, or they have a dongle, which they use on their computer if they're remote traveling. My director's been putting up the share price. He wants me to talk about that. So let's go back to the share price. What you'll see there is a nice, steady, rightward, upward, growing chart, which comes from 50 rands a share 5 years ago. And it's hovered a little bit. Okay, it's a 140 thereabouts, gets up, gets a little bit hit back in recent times. To be fair, that slip there at the end is really just this little bit of a market sag that I was referring to earlier. It's a solid operator, Vodacom. There is no question. Vodafone, the parent company, loves its dividends, so you can assure yourself that this one is going to have a very significantly elevated dividend yield now and forevermore. I think it's got great potential in portfolios where clients want extra dividends. We often add this one as well. I'm talking about portfolios we run for clients at Vestact, my firm. But with regard to the hot stocks portfolio, and as far as this conversation is concerned, for me, Vodacom is definitely hot as well. Shamil Jusub's doing a great job. The company is going from strength to strength. One additional point just to put on the table here, and that is that Vodafone, having sold its US joint venture stake in Verizon Mobile, ended up with a lot of cash, some of which was distributed into the Vodafone shareholder base. But one does hear stories from time to time about the possibility that Vodafone itself will be involved in substantial additional corporate action down the line. Not that that particularly involves anything changing with regard to Vodacom, but it is not inconceivable that at some point down the line, Vodafone may seek to acquire the balance of the minorities in Vodacom. Okay? That means that if you're a shareholder in Vodacom here, it's not inconceivable that you might get a buyout offer down the line. Who knows? We don't know when. You can't really buy the shares on that basis, but it's a nice to know underpin. And that counteracts the possibility that the South African government, which still has about a 12% stake in Vodacom, may sell that stake. You'll be familiar with the news that Vodacom shares held by the South African government are potentially part of that family silver that the South African government is rumored to want to sell in order to put the cash proceeds into Eskom. So keep that in mind. Sometimes people think that's a problem, but as far as I'm concerned, there is the additional telecom demand which might come from a global point of view, meaning that that factor does get overweighed. Yes, so in summary, definitely hot for me on Vodacom.